Ukraine will receive long-range missiles, and Volodymyr Zelenskyy held a meeting with Pope Francis. What's on the world's agenda this week? Good afternoon, this is Pavel Stelmach on UATV state channel, explaining hard truths in easy terms for the whole free world, directly from Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelenskyy spent 2 days visiting European countries. On Saturday he visited Italy and the Vatican, and on Sunday Germany. The president of Ukraine announced that he agreed in Italy on weapons and anti-aircraft defense for Ukraine. And here it is important to remember the quote of Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni: "When we in Ukraine protect freedom and our lives from Russian bombs and missiles, from terror, we distance the war from the rest of Europe." Italy will continue to support Ukraine as much as it is necessary for us to stand up and protect our people and our territory. The leaders of the countries also approved a joint declaration where Italy supported the start of negotiations on European Union this year and with signals regarding cooperation and integration into NATO. Volodymyr Zelenskyy also met with Pope Francis. As the Ukrainian president wrote on social networks, he emphasized tens of thousands of deported children. So countries must make every effort to return them home. In addition, Zelenskyy asked the Pope to condemn Russian crimes in Ukraine. After all, there can be no equality between the victim and the aggressor. Zelenskyy and the Pope talked for 40 minutes and exchanged gifts. Pope Francis presented President Zelenskyy with a small sculpture in the form of an olive branch, a symbol of peace. Instead, the Ukrainian president presented to the Pope an icon of the Madonna, painted on the remains of a bulletproof vest. And already today, Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with the President of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Berlin. And these are already results. Germany is preparing to hand over military aid package worth 2,700 million euros. In particular, our soldiers will receive 30 Leopard 1 tanks, 20 Marder BMPs, 4 Iris-T air defense systems, and 15 anti-aircraft guns Gepard, 200 reconnaissance drones and 100 armored personnel carriers. As Volodymyr Zelenskyy said in Berlin, together we will win and restore peace. Volodymyr Zelenskyy also received the international prize named after Charlemagne. I should note that this is Zelensky's first visit to Germany since the beginning of the war. It takes place under unprecedented security measures. Everything is surrounded by the police, snipers on the roofs and helicopters in the air. The next day, Great Britain announced providing Kiev with long-range missiles, Shadow Storm. It is an air-launched cruise missile with a range of 250 kilometers, and we are grateful to partners for providing modern missile weapons and expect further quantitative and qualitative increase in assistance. Long-range missiles change the rules of the game on the battlefield, giving Ukraine the opportunities it has asked for since the start of the full-scale war. From now on, Russia has no safe places in the occupied territories in the deep rear. The goals of the armed forces are exclusively military targets of the enemy. Weapons used for their destruction are high precision. Also be sure to check out our recent interview with the editor-in-chief of the Israeli edition Details on the topic of Russian propaganda influence in Israel and the celebration of the day of victory over Nazism in Israel itself. On Wednesday, the NATO Military Committee was held in Brussels. Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhny did not appear in Brussels even through online.
I received a letter yesterday from the Ukrainian Chod, our friend General Valery Zaluzhny, that even his participation via BICES VTC was impossible due to the complex operational situation defending against the Russian aggression. Our best wishes are with the Ukrainian defenders.
During the meeting, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg admitted that Russia's war against Ukraine has accelerated the reform of the alliance, updated defense capabilities, and generally influenced the members of the alliance as a reason for more decisive action in Europe.
We have increased the readiness of our forces. We have deployed combat-ready troops to the east of the alliance for the first time in our history. and European allies and Canada have spent an additional $350 billion extra on defense. When President Putin launched his full-fledged invasion of Ukraine in 2022, we were therefore ready. Within hours, we activated all our defense plans. We put 40,000 troops under NATO command, backed by significant air and maritime power. And we strengthened our forward defenses from the Baltic to the Black Sea.
For the first time, the Minister of Defense of Finland is present at the meeting of the Military Committee as a full-fledged member, on which special emphasis was placed by the chairman of the committee. An important discussion at the meeting of committee members is the synchronization of political and diplomatic efforts with military actions. It is hard to imagine when a full-scale war is going on in Europe, but the defense ministers still try to find such solutions. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced the need to create a new security system on the planet and described the priorities for the alliance like this.
As we prepare for a more dangerous future, we must redouble our efforts to keep our 1 billion citizens safe and to uphold the rules-based international order. High-intensity warfare is back in Europe. Global competition is rising. Authoritarian regimes are challenging our values, interests and security, and other threats are also multiplying. From terrorism to cyber attacks, from nuclear proliferation to climate change. So we need to step up for this new era of strategic competition, and NATO is rising to the challenge.
Russia's war against Ukraine is the gravest threat to Euro-Atlantic security in decades. What Moscow hoped to be a 3-day war is now entering its 15th month. The strength and determination of the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian people continue to astound us. Earlier today, we dedicated a special session to the military situation in and around Ukraine. The Ukrainian military representative provided a detailed account of the situation on the ground and stipulated the support that Ukraine requires to continue the fight for what is legally theirs. The Chiefs of Defense reaffirmed their unrelenting support. There is no doubt that NATO will support Ukraine for as long as it takes. Make no mistake, Russia will not stop at Ukraine. Its ambitions lie far beyond its borders. We have seen it with Abkhazia and the South as Ossetia, as well as Transnistria. Again and again, Russia has shook the foundations of the rules-based international order. And unfortunately, they have ushered us, NATO, in a new era of collective defense.
Dmitry Peskov, the press secretary of the Russian president, said in a commentary to the Bosnian edition ATV that on the eve of the full-scale invasion, Moscow did not expect the intervention of Western countries and NATO in the conflict. Before the full-scale war, Western diplomacy made several months of public and non-public efforts to dissuade Russia from invading, but Moscow would not hear it. The Kremlin underestimated the willingness of the West to help Ukraine and therefore resorted to the full-scale aggression. Accordingly, to force Russia to end the war, the West must demonstrate its determination to help Kyiv even more. Peskov's confession is an attempt to justify why Russia is losing, arguing that it is not a war with Ukraine, but with the entire West and NATO bloc. In fact, NATO is not a direct participant in the war. If Russia were really at war with NATO, it would have been defeated long ago. Putin's entourage obviously is already looking for someone to blame, who framed the president, urging to start a large-scale war against Ukraine. Today in Turkey, presidential elections are holding. The rivals are the current head of state Recep Tayyip Erdogan and opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Competitive elections testify to the democratic nature of Turkey. Ukraine will respect the choice of the Turkish people. Regardless of the outcome, the elections in Turkey will not harm the direct dynamics of Ukrainian-Turkish relations. The key priority for Ukraine in the context of the elections is civil peace and political stability in Turkey. The Kremlin has traditionally used elections in other countries to try to interfere and destabilize the situation. The manifestation of such interference in Turkey is the discrediting of the grain initiative. Right now, the discussion about its prolongation is continuing. On Friday, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar stated that the sides are approaching an agreement on its extension after negotiations in Istanbul. The head of the Ministry of Defense of Turkey reminded that more than 30 million tons of agricultural products were already exported from the Black Sea ports as part of the grain agreement.
Thanks to this agreement, the global food crisis was largely prevented and stability was ensured in the markets. Hulusi Akar, Turkish Defense Minister.
At the same time, the United Nations does not have a backup plan if Russia withdraws from the Black Sea Grain Initiative. This was stated by UN Speaker Stefan Dujarric, reports Voice of America. According to Dujarric, if the initiative cannot continue, it will have a negative impact on global food security and world food prices. In turn, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, commenting on the complaints of the Russian Federation about the insufficient benefit for her from the agreement, said,
Russia exports just fine. It exports grain and fertilizers at the same level, if not higher than before the full-scale invasion. The more Russia hinders Ukraine's exports, the higher the prices. And since Russian exports are developing well, they get more income. Linda Thomas-Greenfield, U.S. Ambassador to the UN.
Russia has already slowed down the export of Ukrainian grain as part of the grain deal, slowing down inspections. The number of inspections of ships coming to Ukraine and leaving the country has significantly decreased from the highest indicator in October 2022. 4.4 inspections at the entrance per day and 6.3 per exit, to 1.4 per entry and 1.5 per exit in one day in May 2023. Turkey announced that they could extend the grain agreement for another 2 months. Therefore, the results of the presidential elections in Turkey will affect not only the country itself, but also the entire Black Sea region and even the countries of Africa and Middle East. And political upheavals in the country will be beneficial to the Kremlin. And today we will answer the question of user George Caballero Castillo 2435, who asked, how is the reconstruction of Ukraine going? It is very hard to answer this question because in the conditions of war, it is not possible to build large-scale plans for the restoration of the country's infrastructure, but now there is an opportunity to prepare project documentation for the future. However, infrastructure restoration is still taking place. In those places where peaceful life has been restored, infrastructure is being built at the expense of local budgets. The situation with the railway is different. Budget funds and Ukrzaliznytsia own funds are used there. Roads and infrastructure are also restored at the expense of local budgets and the balance of the road fund of the country's central budget. And you don't need to forget about the restoration of the energy sector. During all the winter, Russian heated-out power plants, distribution and transformation stations, repair of energy facilities, which should last a month, is carried out by Ukrainian energy workers in a few days, said Volodymyr Kudrytsky, the head of Ukrenergo. According to the assessment of the World Bank and the UNDP, the scale of destruction caused to the Ukrainian energy system is exceptional. Only the primary needs for the restoration and protection of the Ukrenergo high-voltage network this year amount to almost $1 billion. The government of Ukraine has improved the Unified Digital Recovery Management System. Prime Minister of Ukraine Denis Shmyhal, at the meeting of the Cabinet of Ministers, named 3 goals of this pilot project. Thus, its action will be extended not only to infrastructure but also to construction and real estate. These decisions will contribute to the speedy restoration of Ukraine.
Цей експериментальний проект має 3 цілі.
The project has 3 goals. The first is to speed up recovery, to strengthen its inclusiveness. The second is to ensure the transparency of processes and increase the trust of citizens and foreign partners. The third is to more effectively attract resources for recovery. State registrars and entrepreneurs are exempted from the fee for obtaining exec from the state register. The principle of single window will be implemented to obtain the right to build and state registration of ownership of the constructed facility.
In the plan for the rapid recovery of Ukraine for 2023, presented by the Cabinet of Ministers, we are already talking about hundreds of different projects, hundreds of cities and towns where recovery will take place simultaneously. In particular, the government has identified 6 settlements where restoration will take place according to completely new principles. These are Borodyanka and Moshchun in the Kyiv region, Trostyanets in Sumy, Posad Pokrovske in the Kherson region, Tsirkuni in Kharkiv, and Yahidne in the Chernihiv region. All of them will be restored comprehensively. This means that not individual buildings and structures will be rebuilt, but all with a systematic approach, a new layout, and a complete transformation of these settlements. The rebuilding of Ukraine was the most ambitious project of the 21st century, requiring huge resources. But at the same time, recovery opened up countless opportunities and prospects, especially for business, which will be the engine of change. In 2023, the Ukrainian government plans to implement restoration projects worth $14 billion. 5 priorities have been identified: energy recovery, humanitarian demining, housing rehabilitation, critical and social infrastructure, and private sector development. According to the Prime Minister of Ukraine, the state faces 2 main tasks: to win and start restoration now, without waiting for the end of the war. Well, that's all for today, and please subscribe, comment, and ask your questions. The hardest of them will be answered online by our team of UATV state channel that is anxious to break any hard thing into easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and tuned for more.